Good morning. This is Valerie Clark, and good afternoon to our East Coast friends. I'm the Director of Faculty Development and the Group Program Leader for the Group on Faculty Affairs here at the WMC. The Group on Faculty Affairs is delighted to lead this Faculty Lifecycle webinar series to address issues and solve real problems for academic medical faculty. The Faculty Lifecycle webinar series is a 5-part series featuring live town halls on topics through the continuum of the faculty life from residents through senior faculty. Each webinar is hosted by a different focus unit within the WMC in a truly collaborative project. In February, the residents led a discussion on bringing top talent to academic medicine, where we talked to emerging leaders in academic medicine and heard from them how they might find opportunities within academic medicine. In March, the Group on Women in Medicine welcomed the author Liza Monday to address the increasing number of women breadwinners entering academic medicine. Today's webinar, Where Did My Career Mojo Go?, will offer realistic, practical tools to lower stress, prevent burnout, and improve institutional culture. The GFA and the WMC are currently leading a number of efforts related to burnout, vitality, and faculty wellness, one of which is the GFA Professional Development Conference, July 14th through the 17th in Vancouver. The conference theme is Vim and Vigor in Vancouver, 10 years of building and sustaining faculty vitality. I hope that you will make plans to join us in Vancouver to help us celebrate GFA's 10th birthday. For today, for this webinar, you will need a handout. You can find that handout on the GFA webpage under the Faculty Lifecycle series. Click there and look at the handout as you participate in the web series. Now I'm going to hand live webinar series off to Paula Treef, who is serving as today's moderator. I hope you enjoy. Paula?
Thank you, Valerie. So hi, everybody. I'm Paula Treef. I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs and Faculty Development, and I'm a Professor of Psychiatry at SUNY Upstate Medical University in today's sunny Syracuse, New York. I'm the GFA representative, and I'm also one of the GWIMS and GDI representatives to the WAMC. And I'm a clinical psychologist, so I think I come to this issue of burnout and resilience from a variety of perspectives. I've often counseled individuals who are experiencing burnout and tried to help chairs to look at their systems and how they may contribute to burnout and, more importantly, or as importantly, build resilience. So I'm here today really to facilitate the discussion, and to do so, we really want you, the listeners, to join in. So there will be a half-hour Q&A session at the end of the presentations for those of you who can stay online. But we also really urge you to submit your questions anytime during the webinar, and I will try to field them to our speakers, and they'll also be able to see them. So our chat line is open right now. So first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Craig Porter. Dr. Porter is a professor of pediatrics and the vice chair for faculty, as well as a practicing pediatric nephrologist at the Medical College of Wisconsin. He served in many university roles, particularly as they relate to faculty governance and the promotion and tenure process. And he's also served on many GFA committees. He has particular expertise in conflict management, and he will share that, and he's going to share his perspective really throughout this webinar. So Dr. Porter, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself, more about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Paula. Hello to all the participants, and particularly my GFA colleagues. I currently serve on the GFA Steering Committee and also as chair of the Membership and Nominating Committee. And as Dr. Treef indicated, I am a practicing pediatric nephrologist and have done so for many years, hence my intersection, I suppose, with burnout. The landscape at the Medical College of Wisconsin really, in respect to burnout, is really one that sort of skirts the issue through issues that surround wellness. I don't mean skirt the issue in a bad way. I think we certainly attack issues of physician burnout to a degree through wellness programs. As many of you know, our human resources department and our Office of Faculty Affairs are a blended operation. So through the human resources end of that operation, we have a number of wellness programs, nutrition, stress management, others, that I think get to issues surrounding maintaining your career mojo. The Office of Faculty Affairs and the Dean are committed to professionalism, which I think does a similar I think it's related as well. And so we do have a professionalism enrichment committee on campus chaired by our new Senior Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs, Christina Runge. And that group sponsors Professionalism Week, where we invite noted speakers to talk to us about professionalism. At the health systems level of our organization, we actually just last week had a grand rounds on the topic of physician wellness led by a relatively junior faculty member in emergency medicine, Cassie Ferguson, who is working directly with leaders of the health system to include physician wellness as one of our hospital system quality measures. And then coupled with that, our Department of Pediatrics Chair, Dr. Rob Lane, has actually asked 3 more senior members of the department to undergo coaching training to become resilience champions to serve the faculty who may be experiencing various forms of mid or early or late career crisis. So I will stop there and turn the microphone over to Dyke.
No, you have to return it back.
Oh, I am sorry, Paula.
That's okay. I'm going to introduce Dyke. So next, I'm really pleased to introduce our keynote speaker, who's Dr. Dyke Drummond. Dr. Drummond is a Mayo-trained family practice doctor, a burnout survivor. He's an author, an executive coach, and a consultant to individual physicians and healthcare organizations across the United States. He is the CEO of thehappymd.com. You can see that on the slide, with over 9,300 physician newsletter subscribers. He's also the author of a book titled Stop Physician Burnout, What to Do When Working Harder Isn't Working. I've been working with Dr. Drummond now for a few months developing this webinar, and I found him to be not only extremely knowledgeable about this topic, but also truly passionate about it. You'll see that he's fully committed to raising awareness, to helping faculty and institutions proactively address burnout and build resilience. I'm going to let Dr. Drummond talk about his very interesting path to this kind of unique career, but welcome, Dr. Dyke Drummond.
Thanks, Paula. Thanks, Craig. Thanks, AAMC, for this opportunity, and welcome everybody to the webinar. Please participate in the chat box, and know, too, that we have some polls in the webinar here today, too, and one of them is going to come right off the bat. And if you have the ability to print out the handout and follow along, that handout is a fill-in-the-blank handout, not to insult your intelligence, but it helps you learn more, remember it longer, recall it more easily. It's also an action plan when we're done for today. So this is called Maintaining Your Mojo, and I'm so happy to be here because I get a chance to teach faculty. Because just so you know, you're the biggest role model for your students and residents. And in most cases, the faculty members they remember the most and the longest are the ones who model burnout perfectly rather than any sort of wellness or well-being. So here we go. This is my disclaimer. I'm going to slide through that real fast. But here's our first poll question. And it goes like this. Have you personally, the people who are listening, those of you who are listening to me right now, have you ever had a day or a week so stressful that in a quiet moment afterward, you heard a little voice in the back of your head say something like, I'm not sure how much longer I can keep going like this? You'll see the poll in the right-hand frame of your webinar face here. See the yes or the no? We're going to leave this open for just a few seconds here and allow you to hit either yes or no. Tell me whether this has ever happened to you. And then we're going to close this poll in about 10 more seconds and see who's on the line and whether or not they've ever had this experience. So let's go let it go for about 10 more seconds and see what the tally is.
Dyke, this is Craig with a housekeeping detail. There is a tiny little submit button down in the lower right-hand corner.
Ah, there it is. Yeah, so hit yes or no, and then the submit button's down lower right. Thanks, Craig.
Sure.
And then I'd like to go ahead and shut this down when it gets to 60 seconds. It says remaining time 8. Yep, and go ahead and show us the poll results if you could. And I'm assuming we can see those in just a couple of seconds here. Typically, I deliver a presentation in a room of at least 300 people. That's a mixture of physicians, nurse practitioners, PAs, and all of their significant others. I've never been in any venue where anything other than 100% of the people raised their hands. So there we go, folks. There's our setting. Have you ever had a day or a week so stressful you didn't think you could keep going? Most people will say yes to that answer, to that question. Here's our objectives today. I'm going to show you the #1 threat to doctors in these chaotic times. I'm going to fill a hole in your medical education. Your faculty members, you're teaching people, you're giving them this hole as well. So let's fix it for you so you can fix it for them. And I'm going to show you 4 field-tested burnout prevention tools you can use this week for results this week. And since it's really important that you understand where I'm coming from, let me tell you a little bit about me. So I graduated from Mayo Medical School in 1984. I did my family practice residency in Redding in the UC Davis system, way up north in Redding, California, and then moved to a city a little bit north of Seattle, Mount Vernon, Washington, about halfway between Seattle and Vancouver, BC, where I was a full-service family doc in a 40-doctor multi-specialty group. I was their executive committee chairperson. I was their managed care medical director back in the 90s when we were fully capitated for primary care. And I was basically the quintessential small-town successful family doc. Second top producer, beautiful wife, lovely children, and then in 1999, over about a 3-week period in my practice, it felt to me like every time I went into work, somebody was putting me in a chokehold, like a cage match, UFC, and it felt like my life was actually being threatened by this loss of energy. I didn't know what it was. I was confused, and at the time I'd been with my group for 10 years, and in that situation you were eligible for a sabbatical. So I took a month off, and I didn't do any healthcare related things, thinking my batteries were run down and I needed to recharge. But when I came back to the office, it was clear that something down inside had snapped and I was done. And the first day that I was back in the office, by lunchtime, I actually walked in and gave my resignation and walked away from my medical career, which I don't recommend as a transition strategy, because it certainly set me up for a whole bunch of struggles. Because if I'm not a doctor at the age of 40, what am I? Well, I got certified as a coach. Eventually, my now ex-wife and I started a successful training business teaching people who were Lean Six Sigma professionals in the Navy how to lead better meetings. But then in 2010, when that marriage ended and that business went away, I was burnt to the ground for the second time. And I decided I didn't have anything else left to lose, so I was going to see if there was any way I could help burned out doctors like I had been burned out in 1999. It took me a couple of years, but I realized that what had choked me out was actually my own burnout. At the time, 2010, the only way to find resources if you're burned out would be to Google it. So I Googled it, and all I found was prevalence studies, which is profoundly depressing if you're looking for help. So I put up a blog post called Physician Burnout, Why It's Not a Fair Fight. It's been at the top of the Google search returns for that term, physician burnout, for the last 4 years, and I started a website called thehappymd.com. I'm a happy guy, but I'm not the happy MD. This is a place where you can go so you can be a happy MD or DO or nurse practitioner or PA. At this point, we have 9,000, almost 10,000 members at the site, and the last 4 years of my life have been completely dedicated to training and coaching for individual physicians. I have about 1,700 hours of one-on-one coaching with burned out doctors, and about 64 organizations I've trained in the last 2 years. So I have a perspective ground level with individual docs and organizations, and then I also do consulting for organizations as well. So what I'm going to teach you today are things that I've tested in the real world and I know will work for you, and a different perspective than somebody who researches and talks about burnout. I've been in the trenches myself and with hundreds of physicians in all different specialties. So let me show you some things that I've learned. The #1 threat to doctors is not any of these things. It's just not. Each of them are individually scary, but they aren't the #1 threat. The #1 threat is actually the epidemic of burnout that all the chaos is causing in all the frontline providers. And even though we're going to be talking about doctors today, everybody's involved. Nurse practitioners, PAs, nurses, MAs, reception, all the administration. We all suffer from excess levels of burnout, and I'll show you why in just a second. Now, if you're following along on the handout, at the top left, there's a little circle. Go ahead and write the number 3 in there, because we have 40 years worth of research on burnout in physicians. And on average, no matter what specialty I survey or in what first world country, the background prevalence of burnout in doctors is about 1 in 3 and has been so for the last 30 years. Meaning, if I compare Japanese gastroenterologists with English pediatricians and American vascular surgeons, the numbers are going to average out to about 1 in 3. And then, Paula and Craig, do you think that it's getting worse here in the United States recently? What do you think?
So actually, I was just writing a little note to myself because you said that it's been pretty stable for the last 30 years, and it's certainly the common perception worse and worse, not that it's been stable, so that surprises me.
Here we go. Here's the Mayo study done in 2011 and 2014 of burnout in general population of American physicians. 2011, the headline was, burnout is more prevalent amongst doctors than the normal population. And by the way, the background rate of burnout in an unselected group of employees is about 25%. So physicians were about twice that in 2011. Well, they resurveyed in 2014. These results just came out about 3 months ago. The press releases on this where the doctor's burnout rate crosses 54%. But if you dig into both these studies, they measured some other things too. Here's the prevalence of positive screening for depression amongst that physician population. And then this is the one that really shocks me. This is the percentage of physicians who answered yes to this question. Have you contemplated suicide in the last 12 months? And if you run the numbers, that's an 80% increase. So burnout is incredibly common, and its complications, depression and suicidal ideation, are very common as well, and getting worse in the United States of America. That's a political discussion as to why, but it's definitely there. Now, so burnout is common, but why is it important? Well, it lowers patient satisfaction and quality of care, and this isn't just me saying this. I've got a stack of literature chest high here that can do this connection for you. It also increases these things: medical error rates, malpractice risk. Matter of fact, I'll say that the burnout level of the doctor at the time that they're knee-to-knee with the patient in the exam room or in the hospital is the most important factor in determining the quality of care and their relationship with the patient. Now, it didn't used to be this way, but nowadays you get paid more for patient satisfaction and quality of care. And obviously, error rates and malpractice harm the organization financially as well. So right now, I think we've created a moment in time where the CFO, ideally, is the person pounding the boardroom table for burnout prevention for the providers, because it makes financial sense in a way now that it never has before. Complications. Well, burnout causes all of these things. And if I was in the usual room of 300 doctors where I asked them this question, hey, have you ever lost a colleague to suicide? Half the hands in the room would go up, and they aren't talking about the same person. The annual toll of suicide on physician population is, we know that recorded suicides among doctors are about 400 a year, but it's widely believed that that number is massively underreported. And in some cases, we know of spectacular suicides, like the pair of, I believe it was either residents or medical students that jumped off a balcony on a med school campus in New York a couple of years ago and committed suicide together on campus. So burnout and burnout's complications are potentially fatal for physicians and other healthcare professionals.
Doug, can I ask you a little bit about the overlap with depression and burnout? Because one of the things that I've found is that when physicians come to me and what I'm hearing is they're burning out, they're usually, if they have reached out to anybody, they're usually being told, well, you have depression, you should see a psychiatrist, you should be on antidepressants. And the problem is really placed in them in that way.
Yep.
And I wonder what your thoughts were.
Well, first of all, that's diagnosing when I think that burnout, absent of suicidal intent, burnout is a normal response to the work stresses that they're under. So I tend to, as a coach, not diagnose or turn something into pathology, but inside our healthcare profession, you're certainly going to see people wanting to diagnose and wanting to put labels on things. Now, for the tip of the iceberg of folks who have burnout and then develop drug addiction, depression, suicidal intent, and things like that, I think it's appropriate if you can get them into the psychiatric and psychological counseling world, go for it. But for most people, we would hope that we would pick them up before it goes that far. However, having said that, no doctor is going to willingly accept a diagnosis of that unless internally they basically have completely capitulated on getting better. So I tend to want to reach people much more early than when it turns into that. But you have to have fallback crisis management procedures in place for the folks who slip through the cracks. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So even though burnout's common, I maintain to you that it's not normal. It's identifiable, preventable, and treatable, and it actually has the highest and best use. As a matter of fact, if you're over the age of 50, you've probably been through that highest and best use at least once. We'll talk about that in a second, too. So, Paul and Craig, I'm going to just bring into the conversation here. Burnout is a disorder of energy metabolism, and I'm not talking about the Krebs cycle here. What I'm talking about is more like the Force in Star Wars. Let me just ask you, if you were going to explain the difference between burnout and stress to someone, what would you say? How would you describe the difference?
Well, it might be reasonable to think of burnout as the consequence of stress.
Okay, great. All answers are correct, by the way. Paula, how about you?
Yeah, no, that's what I would say. I would say that the stressors are in the environment or in your life experience, and the burnout is your reaction to that, or potentially reaction to that, as well as your own resilience in managing stress. Not all stress causes burnout. I think it's a mix between the situation and the person.
Right.
Exactly. So the way I describe it is when you're simply stressed, you have the ability to recover, even though your energy level, which is this red line here, may wibble up and down depending on what's going on any given day or week. And when you enter into the burnout, you enter into basically a downward spiral that feels like it has no bottom. And if you wanted to use fancy terms, we would say it was the loss of your energetic homeostasis. Quick question. Here we go in the poll. Is there such a thing as good stress? Yes or no? So let's pop that poll question up. And remember, you hit the yes or the no, and then down in the lower right-hand corner, there's a small submit button to submit your answer. Is there such a thing as good stress? Yes or no? And we're going to run this for just a few more seconds because I certainly have an opinion here. And I think I'm about to show you something that you may not be aware of. This may be a good learning point for those of you who are faculty, and certainly for those of you who are listening who are residents and or medical students. So let's go ahead and close out the poll, please, and see what our numbers are. Typically, again, in my room of 300 doctors, all the hands would go up in response to this, that yes, there is such a thing as good stress. So let's see what you all thought. It takes a couple of seconds for these results to render. And what I'll tell you as we wait for those results to render themselves is that, here we go. Yep, so we've got 36 out of 37 saying, yep. Well, here's what I'll tell you. It depends. And it actually depends on this. This is the bell-shaped curve that relates performance on the y-axis with stress on the x-axis. And you can see as I increase stress on you, your performance will improve to a peak. And then if I keep stressing you, you will actually fall off the right shoulder of the bell and your performance will decrease. Here's the challenge. Most people in a healthcare setting are sitting on the edge of their bandwidth, and for most people, what's happening is they're sitting here on the curve on any given day. Now, my question to you, Paula, Craig, if your people are here, does more stress help them perform, yes or no?
Where's the here?
On that orange line on the curve.
Okay.
My answer would be no.
Yep. In that situation, basically, you need to give them more time and more resources. You need to back off in order to improve their performance. So fundamentally, this is a key leadership and certainly a key faculty awareness. Where are you and where are your team and where are your residents and medical students today on the stress versus performance curve? By the way, what's the quickest way to find out the answer to that question?
probably in terms of your performance. If performance is really, if you feel as compared to your kind of optimum level that you're not functioning at that level, then that would be a real red flag.
Probably ask.
Yeah, ask them. So one of the things you can do is actually carry around a little laminated copy of this without the orange line and ask them where they are today on the stress curve. Or, you know, the pain scale that has the faces that go from the crying one to the smiling one, have them pick one and ask them where their stress level is today. Because some days you're going to push because they're on the left-hand side of the curve, and some days you're going to back off if you want to improve their performance rather than drive them into burnout. So is there such a thing as good stress? It depends on where you start on this curve. This is Christina Maslach. She's an industrial psychologist who in the 1970s was hired by large employers in the Bay Area of San Francisco to study employee engagement. She and her team discovered its exact opposite, people that were disengaged in a way that made them sick. Her Maslach burnout inventory is what we're talking about when we say 30% of doctors have at least one symptom of burnout. The Maslach burnout inventory has 22 questions when you take the actual inventory, but it only has 3 symptoms. It's the gold standard for measuring burnout, so let's go through the symptoms one at a time. Symptom number 1 is emotional and physical exhaustion. Most people will say something like this. Every doctor I've ever met and every resident I've ever met will admit to this. So we dance that little edge of the cliff of burnout all the time. Symptom number 2, she called depersonalization. It's when you get cynical, sarcastic. It's also known as compassion fatigue. And so I think we've got a poll question coming up here. Yes, we do. Poll question number 3, and our last poll question for the day, is venting healthy? I'd love to know your answer. Is venting healthy, yes or no? So hit yes or no on the right-hand column, and then make sure you hit that submit button down below on the bottom right, and let's see what you think. What do you think, Paula? What do you think, Craig? Yes or no?
It's a trick question.
It is. It is. I would probably say in some circumstances it could be healthy.
I think you're looking for a no, but I think it depends on what you mean by venting, and sometimes people would call venting talking to people and eliciting support. So
my studio audience are hair splitters. No, typically, go ahead and close the poll out. Close the poll out. Typically, I get all hands saying yes, it's healthy when I ask this in a big audience. So we've got 27 of 36 that have answered yes. Here's what I'll say. We know that depersonalization or compassion fatigue, cynical, sarcastic, is a dysfunctional coping mechanism. You, as a provider of health care and a caregiver for other people, realize that your energy levels are threateningly low, and you're attempting to put a barrier between you and the people that you take care of. The challenge is it violates the prime directive of health care, which is the patient comes what? What's the missing word, Paula and Craig?
First.
Yep, comes first. So what happens is when you're venting, it feels good for a very short period of time. Usually that good feeling goes away as soon as you're out of your venting conversation, and it actually accelerates your downward spiral because you've just dissed the person who's supposed to come first for you professionally. So I would say that venting, no, is not healthy. It's a sign of burnout. The challenge is that burnout is so common in some workplaces that everybody does it, and it becomes venting, that is. Everybody vents. It becomes a piece of the culture. It's simply a sign of the prevalence of burnout. It is not a healthy thing to be doing. If your energy levels are at a healthy state, you don't have an urge to vent. My perspective.
You're talking about venting about patients? I'm a little confused here.
Yes, about patients.
Oh, about patients, okay. I was thinking of it more as a physician who is complaining about not having adequate resources or
no.
And sometimes
nope. That's an appropriate concern raised in an inappropriate way.
Okay. And that's the way I was thinking and contemplating a positive response to that sort of complaint.
Yeah, there's a way to be disruptive, meaning air your concerns and not be labeled disruptive. I actually teach people how to do that. But I'm talking about right now venting about a patient.
Okay.
As in, yeah, like you would ever lose weight. Or can you believe the drug seekers around here? Yeah, they're a bunch of dirtballs, aren't they? And then we go on to tell stories about who's got the biggest dirtball patient. Like that.
Okay, That's not good.
Third symptom, lack of efficacy. Person will say, what's the use? Another common saying in your head at this point is, I'm concerned that if things don't change, I'm going to make a mistake and somebody's going to get hurt. Now, we now know that men and women experience burnout differently.
Really?
Can Paula and Craig please say, duh?
No, actually, I'm surprised at that. What are the gender differences that you know?
We know that this symptom is primarily amongst women because men, no matter how burned out they get, will never doubt the quality of their work. The other thing we know that's different is that at this stage, a woman will tend to open up to some of her friends and admit that there's something that's not going well and perhaps even ask for help. Men, not so much, just like we don't ask for directions when we're lost in a rental car. So, we can talk about why this difference exists, but it's at least nurture and neuroanatomy. But the truth is that in my practice as a burnout coach, I get 25,000 hits a month to my website from all over the world, and anybody can book a free session with me. 80% of my clients are women. So there's definitely gender differences. And this particular interesting difference gives rise to the classic 55-year-old surgeon male, viciously sarcastic, horribly burned out and disruptive, who never is aware of their burnout, and if you bring it up to them, they say to you, yeah, but I'm still doing good work. And everybody knows somebody like that everywhere I go. So burnout pathophysiology, remember I said I thought my batteries are run down. So Paula, Craig, have you ever used that metaphor? My batteries are run down, I need to recharge, yes or no?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Stop it. Stop it. Just stop it. Don't ever do it again. It's completely inappropriate, and let me show you why I say this. If I was the Energizer Bunny and my batteries ran down, what would I do? By the way, it starts with an S.
Stop.
When did you ever stop? What would have happened at any point in time in your training if you had stopped? You wouldn't be a doctor.
Right.
Now, everybody knows one friend in medical school or residency who stopped, right? You probably have one too. The challenge is you remember them stopping, but you can't remember their name. They're lost to follow-up, but there's one thing you know for sure, they're not a doctor. So let's not talk about batteries. Let's talk instead about a much more appropriate metaphor, the energetic bank account. I want you to notice that this bank account has a zero line, but it also shows a negative balance. You can be showing up to work when your energy is below zero. Now, this may be hard for faculty to appreciate, but I just want you to remember your own training. See this red area? That's called residency. That's where you are held under zero on your energy levels to see how much you can take. Now, it's not designed to be that way, it just is. And because we never stop, because it's not about batteries, we show up at work when our energy level is negative and we think we're doing a good job. But if I had measured your quality and patient satisfaction when you show up to work here, as opposed to when you show up to work with adequate energy levels, we will show a measurable difference. Now, what I want everybody to focus on is not the red, it's the white. What I'll tell you is all good things come from a positive energy level. Quality patient care, patient satisfaction, and let's just go a little wider, leadership, even wider, the ability to be a good partner or significant other. How about a good parent? They all come when your energy levels are in a positive balance. So the challenge for us as healthcare workers is to always maintain a positive balance in our energy accounts, even though we've never been taught how to do that. Because here's the first rule of burnout. It goes like this. You can't give what you ain't got. You cannot give what you ain't got, and that means to your patients, to your staff, and to your family. And what's really important is you realize there's not just one of these energetic bank accounts. There's three of them, and they correspond to the symptoms of the Mass Life Burnout Inventory. So let's go through them one at a time. Exhaustion corresponds to a physical energy account. And Paula, Craig, what would you do to make deposits into your physical energy account?
I would exercise, make sure I got good sleep habits. We're trying to.
Pretty straightforward, right? And just remember back to your residency, right? They had exercise facilities in the hospital. They had nutritious food on demand, and you know, you got plenty of rest, right? And what ends up happening, I mean, let's just be clear. What ends up happening is you set down the worst self-care habits on the planet at the time when you need them the most. And so even now, most doctors can't make a meal, no matter how much they paid for it, last more than 15 minutes. Number two, compassion fatigue corresponds to an emotional energy account. So here we go, Paula, Craig, if you were going to fill your emotional energy account so you could be emotionally available for other people, what would you do?
Probably spend time with my family, doing things that I enjoy.
Yeah, I agree. This is a relationship-filled channel. And again, I'm leaning on my work with hundreds of different physicians that have recovered from burnout without changing jobs. This account is juiced by you having healthy relationships and quality time with the people that you love. So think about all the people that you love in your life, all your family members and other people. Have you spent an adequate amount of time with each of them? Or is there maybe somebody that you owe a cup of coffee to, or a letter to, or to read a book as they go to sleep at night to your children to? Do that, and you're going to put a deposit in those accounts. And then the last one, what's the use, corresponds to a spiritual energy account. Now, I'm going to take the lead on this. I'm not talking about religion. However, if you have a religious practice that brings you joy and connects you with your purpose, please continue and please do more of it. What I'm talking about is an ideal patient encounter where you connect with purpose and meaning in your career. And what I mean by ideal patient encounter is the last time you were with a patient, or in this case, since you're faculty, with a resident or medical student in a teaching position, where afterwards you said to yourself, yes, this is why I love what I do. Or you went home and said, honey, 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 sit down. I got to tell you what happened at work with me today. When you have a practice that brings you those experiences, often you will deposit energy into your spiritual energy account. Let me just ask you, Paula and Craig, if you could think back to the last day you had an encounter like that, what was your energy like for the rest of that day?
Great.
Higher or lower?
Great. Higher.
Higher, yeah.
This particular occasion, the ideal patient encounter has the ability to fill all three accounts at once. And 95% of the stories that I hear from people about their description of the ideal patient encounter end with the patient saying thank you. So if we had time, I'd teach you what to do when a patient says thank you and how to get more of that, because that's a very, very important piece of your day and your week. So right now, I just want everybody on the line to notice their energy levels, because I know you've been trained to ignore all of these things. Just check in with yourself right now. What has your physical, emotional, and spiritual energy level been over the last couple of weeks on the job? Just notice. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, if it's red, it's bad, right? My answer is no. It is what it is. It's bad, in my experience, when you're in the red and don't realize it. But since the beginning of all change is calling things by their right name, if you're red, notice it so we can begin to turn things around.
Can I interrupt you? We have a question from someone, and it's about this gender differences issue, and I think it actually could tie into what you're just talking about here. So this individual says, I wonder if there is a necessity for distinguishing between experienced and expressed lack of self-efficacy. Specifically, I think men are socialized not to express doubt, but that doesn't necessarily mean they don't have those thoughts. And kind of in line with that, I was wondering if you've identified gender differences in these areas of balance as well, because you think of women, as you said, turning to their friends or family members or colleagues maybe more than men, expressing their doubt and maybe lack of sense of efficacy.
Yeah, that's a whole different hour-and-a-half seminar.
Okay.
But yeah, women have a closer circle of friends that they're more emotionally intimate with, and they discuss different things when they're together than groups of men. Even if men had self-doubt, they wouldn't discuss it with each other or admit it. So for a man, reaching out for help is usually an experience of complete capitulation and failure. There's a lot of psychological boundaries up against it, but the challenge is outwardly, I can't act on a man who doesn't ask for help. So whether or not they're experiencing something and not acting on it, I can't tell. What I'm looking for is to help people, and I can't help people who don't ask for it and admit there's an issue, right? So fundamentally, the behavior of a man and behavior of a woman are different. And again, we can talk about neuroanatomical differences, the effect of testosterone, conditioning, gender differences, cultural differences, but basically, If you've got somebody who's disruptive and horribly burned out, that's messing with your medical staff 9 times out of 10. Actually, I just talked to somebody who deals only with disruptive doctors. It was 82 times out of 83, it's a man. So the differences are real. Regardless of what the man may be feeling on the inside, their behavior is different. Does that make sense?
Interesting contrast to 85% of your clients are women. So,
oh, yeah.
Remind our listeners to please send questions in, and you can send them to all panelists. Everybody can see your question, or you can just send them to the host, and I'll feed them along.
So the causes of the stress that produces burnout fall into 5 categories that I've seen. After I'd had about 40 coaching clients, these patterns began to emerge. So let's just talk about them. And I think most articles that you see on the internet completely miss the point of most of these. First of all, let's acknowledge that the practice of clinical medicine is stressful because people are sick, hurting, scared, and dying. You did not choose to be the owner of a sushi restaurant where people come in determined to have a good time, and your job is not to mess that up for them. We are battling the forces of darkness and in ally with the forces of light to do what we can to help the people that are sick, hurting, scared, and dying in this world. And as part of our job, bad things happen, and people are traumatized all the time. And the overlap between burnout and trauma is tremendous. Burnout can happen acutely because of traumatic experiences. So the practice itself at its core takes energy. Then you occupy a specific job position. And whatever that job is, it adds multiple layers of stress, at least in part because the work environment, if you're an employee or in an academic setting, is often designed by non-physician administrators that don't know what we know. So if we look at it like this, here's your practice, which is already stressful, and here's your job. The stresses of your specific job are like rings in a tree. So here's your call rotation, your compensation formula, ICD-10, all those things. Now, if you're one of those people that say, no, Dyke, burnout's caused by Obamacare, then I say go get a job in Sweden. And that job will have rings, just like an American job, but you know what? They'll just be Swedish rings, and there'll still be rings.
Dyke, if I could ask a question, where does the sense of shame fit into this? Because I think that shame for failing a patient, for example, making a wrong diagnosis, is that just another ring here?
Well, I think what you're talking about here is a ring around the traumatic experience. So again, in my experience, about 20% of physicians that hire me to be their coach are experiencing active PTSD because of a situation on the job that's echoing back into a situation in residency that echoes back into their family of origin. Certainly shame goes along with responsibility, and certainly shame is a piece, shame and guilt are a piece of being traumatized by a bad outcome, especially if it was your hands that caused the problem. For instance, you lost a patient because you made a mistake and it killed them. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Now, that's not any different for anybody else on the healthcare team. There are famous situations of nurses that have given a medical error and caused a patient death committing suicide. So all of those things are true for anybody in the chain. But typically, shame is associated with errors and trauma. And I put all of those things in the same sort of classification.
Okay.
Certainly one of the things we don't do well at all, and again, this is another different topic, is take care of our people who've had a bad outcome. Typically, we isolate them and treat them as if they have an infectious disease. That's part of the culture of healthcare because residency is a gladiator-style survival contest. If somebody goes down, you get away from them. It doesn't have to be that way. It just is. But as we design the culture around the quadruple aim, we can change those things. It's part of the work I do with organizations.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got cause number 1, the practice of medicine. Cause number 2, your specific job. You can change jobs, you'll just get different rings. Cause number 3 is leadership. For everybody who's listening on the line, let me just ask you, think back to your very first job. Have you ever had a pretty good job and you quit it because of a pretty bad boss? When I ask that in a big room of people, about 60% of the hands will go up. It's true that leadership causes burnout. We didn't think that was true for physicians until recently when they began to be employed in the majority. But here's a study from Mayo last year. If I can get the slide to advance, here we go. what they did, and male's burnout rate is, 40%, just like you would expect, but male is also a highly defined bureaucracy. So every doctor has a specific boss. And what they did was they took these physicians and they had them grade their boss on a 12-item leadership scale, and each item had a top score of 5. So the top score you could give your boss was 60. And just let me ask you, Paul and Craig, do you think there was a correlation between the leadership score and the doctor's burnout?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Linear. So now we can say bad leaders burn out doctors. Guess what's one of the ways that they do that? By the way, everybody listening to this call is a leader. One of the most common ways that leaders burn out their people is by not being aware of the performance versus stress scale that I showed you earlier, that bell-shaped curve. And instead of recognizing where their people are, they push no matter what, thinking there's such a thing as good stress, and they actually burn their people out. Fourth cause is life. I mean, real life begins after residency. Ideally, you either learn how to balance and recharge or not, and I'm going to maintain again that people do not lay down self-care habits in their residency programs. They learn the exact opposite. But the other challenge is this. Life issues can show up as burnout at work. Here's an interesting study, 900 American surgeons. And in this case, we had the surgeon and their significant other in a matched pair, and they asked them one question: has there been a work-life conflict in the last 3 weeks, yes or no? For the couples that answered no, both of them, no work-life conflict, the background rate of burnout was 26%. But if either the surgeon or their significant other said, yes, there has been a work-life conflict, the surgeon's burnout rate doubled. So think about all the things. If you believe my assertion that burnout is when you lose energy at work, you're supposed to be able to come home and recharge, but what are some things that could happen at work, at home, excuse me, that would interfere with your ability to recharge? Now, we won't take the time to make the list right now, but Paula, give me one thing that would mess with your ability to recharge at home.
Well, obviously conflict with if you have a partner, with your partner.
Great. Craig, how about you? What's one thing?
Being in the middle of a home construction project.
There you go. How about your parents get sick and they have to move in the apartment that you're building in your home construction project above your garage? This list is massive. When I teach you how to reach out to a colleague in a couple of minutes, you have to ask them, how are things going on at home? Because the burnout you're seeing at work may have nothing to do with work. It might be something happening at home. And last but not least is the conditioning of our medical education. In part, all of us go to medical school because we think we've got the chops. We think we can hack it. And the reason we think that is we have these personality traits to begin with. Now we're going to enter into an educational process that takes anywhere from 7 to 16 years. These are supposed to be tools that we take out and use and then put back away again, but under continuous use for the rest of your career. And when nobody shows you the off switch, doctors become these things. And if you listen to people describe doctors who are not doctors, they'll say doctors are workaholics, doctors are perfectionists. We aren't deep down underneath, but we certainly are conditioned to be that way by the educational process. And as if that isn't enough, there's more. There's 2 prime directives. Number 1, we've already talked about. The patient comes first. Well, hey, there's another prime directive. It's way deeper, it's way darker, and it is way more powerful, bar none. And here it is. Just think back to your residency program. If your chief or one of your faculty members had ever come up to you under any circumstances and simply said, hey, Paula, hey, Craig, you look tired. Are you okay? What would you have said? Just like that.
Yeah.
Fine.
Absolutely. There's even a whole body of research on physicians showing up at work sick when they know they're a danger to their patients. That's based on the Never Show Weakness programming. So here's the full boat. And I tell you what, basic training in the military is 6 to 13 weeks, depending on the branch of the service. And in 6 to 13 weeks, I can take a whole bunch of 18-year-old recruits, and they will walk into a live fire exercise afterward. All I got to do is ask, and I don't have to ask nicely, because they've been conditioned to believe that's an order and they have to obey. This conditioning process goes on for 8 to 16 years. It's real. And when I'm in a room full of doctors and their significant others, and I ask the doctor, do you think you were conditioned just a little bit? I have to warn the significant others to keep their elbows down because they're giving them an elbow at that point. Promise. This conditioning denies our humanity, blocks us from noticing burnout and from helping each other, and brings most doctors to me, and I talk to dozens of doctors every month who come based on finding us on the internet around physician burnout. Most doctors are stuck in Einstein's insanity definition. Let's just make sure we're on the same page. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting what, Paula and Craig?
The same outcome.
A different result.
Oh, a different result.
Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. However, a workaholic only has one coping mechanism. What's that?
Work.
Work harder, doing more of the same thing. Doctors act like they're crazy a lot because this conditioning is completely unrecognized. So here we go.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I was thinking about the compassion fatigue piece that you talked about earlier, and I wonder sometimes, when you talk about venting and venting about patients, I wonder sometimes if what that is kind of rooted in is that people are angry. People are angry about what they perceive as an insensitive environment, angry about the changes sometimes that they see in themselves, as you're describing, and that's like the safe place to dump that anger. Because if you really look at it yourself, then you have to change it in yourself. If you really put it at the feet of your chair, then you have to address it with your chair. But well,
it's a lot easier to see the speck in somebody else's eye than the log in your own, right? Especially when what's happening is your awareness of burnout is predicated on you recognizing things you put underground a long time ago. So what I'm showing you are some things that are in physicians' true blind spots, and we create them as we train them. So the blind spots is something you can't see that you can't see. It's like talking to a fish about water, and the fish says, quit talking about this water thing. What are you talking about? So one of the most important things for residents to realize is that they are being conditioned to recognize when the conditioning is important to use and when it's actually causing problems.
Yeah, I think that phrase blind spots really captures really what I was saying.
Yep. Well, and what you're talking about is somebody looking at the organizational issues, the issues with the mind, and we're going to get to that in just a second, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to recognizing the role that they're playing unconsciously. So here's my experience, burnout's highest and best use. When you decide you're going to be pre-med, then you go to medical school and residency, what you've actually done is jumped on a set of tracks like a train. You can't go left, you can't go right. You have to complete the prerequisites in order to get into medical school, in order to graduate from medical school, and in order to graduate from your residency or the 4 fellowships you took in a row. And all you've done is stayed on other people's tracks at that point, so you've completely forgotten you have free will. And when you go and get your first job, you're actually looking for another set of tracks. And they're more than happy to show you that set of tracks. It just has a different name. It's called the way we do things around here. And so you get your job, and you do things the way we do things around here. But what are the odds that the way we do things around here are pointed right at your ideal job description? What do you think?
Pretty low.
Let's just say 0, because that's the actual number. And so what happens is you keep doing what people expect of you until it gets so stressful you can't do it anymore. And then at a crisis point, what you'll do is either change your career description here in this organization, or you'll jump to a new job. So what burnout is meant to do is put you on a path with more purpose. It's the impetus for the change that needs to happen. And so the challenge, though, is that typically that turning point is a crisis point. And not everybody turns toward the light. People can turn to alcohol, quit their career, get divorced, all sorts of things can happen. So let's take out the drama and the risk. And let me show you the core of the coaching process that I use, which is to help people always be working to build a more ideal practice. It's 3 steps. The first step is to ask yourself, hey, if I had a magic wand, what is my ideal job description? And then write it down. For those of you who are residents, these are the dreams you had back when you decided to go to medical school of what your future might look like. You can pull those dreams out and write them down. And as a resident or as somebody who's early in your career, you're going to want to revisit this a lot because it changes day to day, week to week, month to month. It's always moving. So you want to regularly review your ideal job description, but keep it written down. What kind of patients do you want to be seeing with what kind of conditions? doing what kind of things with them on what kind of team and what kind of organization for what kind of pay in what area of the world. Write it all down. It's your target going forward. So you're not on the way we do things around here. You're working on your ideal job description. Step number 2 is let's get real. Let's create a Venn diagram. You're going to label one circle, my ideal job, and you're going to label the other circle, this job. This is especially valuable when you're doing a job search because you would only search for your ideal job. And for those of you who are out in practice right now, what I'd like you to do is simply tell me what your overlap is right now in percent. 20, 40, 60, 80. 20 is not good. It's not sustainable. Anything 60 and up is excellent. You have a fundamental match with your ideal job description. It's just a question of fine-tuning. And then step number 3 is to ask the question, hey, if I was going to push those circles more close together, if I was going to increase the overlap between my ideal job and this job, what would I change? Write all those things down. Typically, this is fairly easy. They say, Dyke, I'd change A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. Write it down. And then all you have to do, by the way, if you're waiting for this to be difficult, I've made everything simple enough even a doctor could do it. Although we're all intellectuals, this is very simple, down-to-earth stuff. Once you have your ideal job description, you know what your overlap is with your current job. You've listed the things that would make a difference. All you have to do is pick one and take action. Not the same old action, new action. Because everything that you would do would increase the overlap with your ideal job description. If you're going to do this kind of self-reflection and decide you're going to make a change at work, please tell your team and ask them how they could help. They're waiting. You just have to ask them. And make sure when you make progress with your team that you celebrate with them. And then review your ideal job description and master plan once you're out in your practice, at least quarterly. Certainly use your ideal job description to get your next job. And what will happen when you rise to this level of consciousness about your career is that you're going to struggle some places with some problems that won't go away. There's 2 things I want you to remember from today. The first is you can't give what you ain't got. And the second is the distinction I'm about to show you right now. When you struggle with a problem that won't go away, it's probably not a problem. Let me tell you exactly what I mean. Problems have solutions. And here we go. Paul and Craig, when I apply a solution to a problem, what happens to the problem?
Goes away.
Yep, it goes away, no problem. Clinical example, pointing abscess. What's the solution?
A sharp instrument.
Yep, I&D, incision and drainage steel is what a surgeon might say. And if I drain an abscess, it's going to heal. It's a one-step solution to a problem. The challenge is very few things we face are problems. For instance, a 365-pound type 2 diabetic who's already lost 1 foot, her vision's a little blurry and she gets chest pain when she goes up a flight of stairs. That's not a problem. You can't squeeze the pus out of any of that, but it's a walking stack of dilemmas. And burnout's not a problem either. It's a dilemma, a perpetual balancing act. In this case, the balancing act is the difference between the energy you burn at work and your ability to recharge. Can you maintain that balance? You can't solve it, so stop looking for a solution. You have to create a strategy. And in my experience, when I talk to people who've recovered from burnout, I ask them, how many things did you have to change here to recover from your burnout? They typically say it's 3 to 5 things, but you have to make these new actions and they have to turn into habits because the need to balance will not go away. Burnout never goes away because it's not a problem. It has no solution. You deal with it by using a strategy.
So, Dyke, how do you deal with the response when someone is the ideal job versus the current job and you need to make a change when people look so much outside of themselves and what they say is, well, these are the solutions, these are the 5 things that I could do, but I have no control over any of those and no one's going to make those changes because, just as you said earlier, this is the way we've always done it here. How do you
That's called learned helplessness and a victim stance. I deal with that all the time. When you know exactly what you want and you understand how to manage your relationship with your supervisor, with your boss, and when you understand how organizations work, you will get to a point where it really will be true whether or not you can make the changes that you'd like to make, but 9 times out of 10, you can get exactly what you want if you work at it. But doctors who are in a victim role will instead blame, justify, and complain rather than taking action in their self-interest. And there's a lot of victim behavior in healthcare, especially amongst doctors. This is what drives physician leaders crazy. Doctors walking in their office, thumping the table, blame, justify, complain, storm out. And then you know what that same doctor always does? They go back to their office and keep doing the same things. They drop right back into Einstein's insanity definition. So we have to be clear, if I'm working with a client and they're exercising their learned helplessness around me, I'm going to point it out and ask them, do you really want to change this? Because basically it's one of those, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy arguments? Do you want to make the changes to get the results that you want or not? Because blame, justify, complain is being a victim. Not that you're being victimized, being a victim. Make sense?
Yes, yes.
So, strategy. There's actually two strategies. There's one for the canary and there's one for the coal mine. So everybody listening to this is the canary. So that's a personal strategy. We call that resilience. By the way, resilience is a hostile concept to the front line because if we talk about resilience to a frontline provider, they're going to first of all question, why do I need to be more resilient? What are you going to do to me now? And then if all we do is provide our people with the resilience training, but we don't work on the coal mine, the canary notices that you're shoving them down the same mine. So every organization needs an organizational burnout strategy that is ideally a collaborative system design between the doctors and the administrators on how to create a workplace that works the first time. Now, we could talk about organizational, proactive, system-wide burnout prevention programs, since that's what I do on the consulting side of my business, but right now let's stick with what you can do for yourself as a canary, bigger, stronger canary. And if you look at all the different burnout prevention tools, and it's interesting, right? If burnout was a problem, are you with me? And there was a solution, then the search for a best practice would be a valid approach to the issue. But burnout's not a problem, it's a dilemma, which is what leads to the confusion at the level of leadership. So Paula and Craig, just stick with me for just a second here. If I look at the research on burnout, 90% of it is prevalence, which is useless to you if you're trying to create a system to help your people. However, prevalence research is really easy to do, so people pad their resumes with it. If you throw away the 90% that are on prevalence and look at the research that's been done on tools to lower stress levels, guess what? Everything works. And if I'm an administrator or a physician leader looking for the solution to the problem of burnout and I look and everything works, I'm going to get confused. It's only when I recognize that burnout is a dilemma that I realize, of course, there's going to be all sorts of tools, right? The question is, of all the tools that are available, and I teach 117, which ones will you use in your strategy, and what's the minimal level of complexity that we can do this around? But let me just classify the tools that work. There are tools that decrease stress. There are tools that increase your ability to recharge, because what we're trying to do is maintain that balance. Some of these tools you use on yourself to build your own resilience. Some are things that are done by your organization to detox the mind. And if we put all this together, we get a basic 2x2 quadrant. So we can classify all burnout prevention tools in one of these 4 quadrants. And I'd like to teach you one of the tools that all of my coaching clients have adopted to their benefit that has to do with life balance, that is equally effective for faculty and residents and medical students, and by the way, the general population. So let's look at a work-life balance tool I call the schedule hack, and it all has to do with him. That's an 800-pound silverback lowland gorilla. And Craig and Paul, I'm going to ask you to do a thought experiment with me. Imagine I snuck your keys this morning, and I let him in your house, and this gorilla's been roaming around your house. And as a matter of fact, when you get home, I'm not taking him back. You're going to live with him for a week. If you lived with a silverback, 800-pound lowland gorilla in your house for a week, how much room would he leave you in your house? A lot or a little?
Not very much.
Where would he poop?
Anywhere he wants.
Anywhere he wants, exactly. So here's the metaphor. And by the way, I've got a siren going by my house, unfortunately. Here's the metaphor. Left to its own devices, your choice to become a physician, this gorilla is your career and the house is your life. Real quick question, Paul and Craig, whose gorilla is it?
Should be mine.
Yep. Who else has to live with the gorilla?
Who else has to live with the gorilla?
Correct.
Everyone around?
So whose responsibility is it to put some boundaries on the gorilla?
Mine.
Mine.
And what I'm talking about is let's shut him in the back bedroom so you can have the rest of the house. Here's the way you do that. When you're talking about work-life balance, the strongest structure wins. Everybody on the line right now is carrying a calendar. The question is, what's on the calendar? For most physicians, it's their work and call schedule, not a lot else. What I want to do is show you a way to create a life calendar using things that you already have, no new technology, okay? So the first thing is a paper calendar. It's the easiest thing to do. So get yourself a paper calendar if you don't have one. And then what you do is you grab the paper calendar and a couple of different colored pens, and once a week, usually on a Sunday in my experience, you sit down with that calendar on the kitchen table and you use the pens to plan the week ahead. This is a life calendar, so it doesn't contain work that's already in your cell phone. So what you put on there is your workouts, date night at least twice a month, hot yoga, massage, manicure, pedicure. Set aside an hour to read a book for pleasure. Whatever it is that you want in your life, put it on that calendar, and then you simply take out your cell phone and take a picture of it. So now you have your life calendar for the week ahead in your phone, right alongside your work calendar in most cases. Do that every week so you're always carrying your life calendar, and then practice saying no. So if I don't have my life calendar with me and somebody says, hey, Dyke, can you take a couple extra hours on Thursday? I know what I'm going to say, just like what you would say, is yes, because I don't want to be perceived as weak or not carrying my weight or not being a team player or things like that. But if I am carrying my life calendar with me and somebody says, Dyke, can you take a couple hours on Thursday? I can say, wait a minute, look at the calendar. And then if I've got a conflict, I could say something like, oh, sorry, date night, I'm not going to be able to help. Now, everybody usually stops breathing when I say that. So let me just say it's not always going to work that way. You may owe this person already, and you may say yes because you want to eliminate that debt. Or you may want this person to owe you in the future, so you're going to say yes to put one in your pocket. Or you may say yes simply because you aren't practiced enough saying no. But here's how this drives your accountability. It doesn't matter why you say yes. When you say yes, you can see right there on your phone who you have to get a hold of, apologize to, and reschedule with, because you just threw your plans under the bus. This works every time you use it. Every week that you hack will be more balanced than if you didn't do it. I encourage you to hack your workouts, your hobbies, your social life, date nights twice a month, no matter what. And then there's that one thing. Everybody's got one thing that they do about twice a year, but in the weekend after the week they did that one thing, they're always saying, oh man, if I could just do this every week, it would make a world of difference. Well, hack it into your week. What are you waiting for? If it's not in the calendar, it ain't going to happen. Real quick, just to wrap up, all of you are thinking about a colleague right now that's burned out. At least you think so, even though they might not recognize it. I'm going to encourage you to reach out to them. I'm going to encourage you to take your doctor or leader hat off when you approach them. Hey, John, it's Dyke. Have you got a minute? And John says, sure, what's up? And I say, John, I'm going to reach up onto my head and I'm going to say, John, I'm taking my doctor hat off. This is just you and me, heart to heart. I've been watching you. I'm concerned. How are you doing? And Paula and Craig, what's he going to say just like that to that question?
I'm fine.
Is that him or his programming?
Programming.
It's probably his programming, but I'm going to encourage you to expect intense denial because that would be the normal response, and to be persistent. Continue to approach that person. Don't stalk them, all right? Don't make them think they have a target on their back, but approach them in a way that you're saying, hey, if you're ready to talk, I'm ready to listen. I encourage you to come from your heart because you could be saving their life. The most tragic situations I get into is when I'm called in to deliver this training because of a recent suicide, and there are people who knew the doctor was struggling and did not take action. So reach out. Ask them how they're doing. Bust through this cultural stuff, right? Care about people and show it. Have each other's backs differently. Fundamentally, what I do is help people create culture change. Because the culture that exists in our workplaces right now is an echo of the culture that was created in our residency programs, and none of that was done consciously. They are historical relics. And it's part of what millennials are doing to rewrite the cultural rules in our workplaces. Now, on your sheet of paper, on your handout, the most important thing you could do today is don't stop here. Write down something that you learned, and ideally write down something that you're going to do differently. The only way to get different results is to take different actions. It's the only way out of Einstein's insanity definition. And then I invite you to come and visit us at the Happy MD. You can grab the matrix report that has 117 resources in it, and there's all sorts of other things that we're doing there that can support you, whether you're a faculty member, resident, in creating your own ideal career, and for those of you who are in leadership positions, creating a healthier organization and actually putting the quadruple aim into play. There's Einstein. He said he never said this. Doesn't make it any less powerful. Here's another way to say the same thing. And lastly, here's my mission statement. This is BKS Iyengar, the father of Hatha Yoga in America, to take joy in the well-being of others rather than to make money off their illness. And others, I mean everybody, the patients and all of us who work on behalf of them to deliver care. To take joy in the well-being of others is to share in the riches of the world. And so that's it for me for today, and I'm totally open to any questions. And Paula, did you have any teed up that we can take care of right away?
I don't, but I think now I think people probably have been caught up in listening to you, and as I said, your passion and your commitment to this. And so please submit some questions, and we will present them to Dyke and to Craig. I have something I wanted to say, though. It was about when you were talking about the ideal job description. One of the things that I'm not sure how to say this. One of the things that I guess I've learned over the last few years is that sometimes you think you know what you want, and people close themselves to new opportunities because they say, okay, this is where I'm heading, this is what I want, this would be the best position for me, and there's this other path that somebody may have opened for me, but I'm not going to go there because you know, I'm heading down this particular path, even if it is towards your ideal job description. And at least in my own career, I found that saying yes to new opportunities totally affected my career. I never would have thought that I would be in the role that I'm in GFA, but in terms of research and teaching, that someone had said to me, what's your ideal job? It would not have included this. But when opportunities came along and I exposed myself to new people, new roles, et cetera, and found that really energizing and stimulating, a career path really opened up. So I always encourage people to try to say yes when they think it's something that will be stimulating and energizing, not just to say yes because you can't say no, which is more often, I think, what happens. So
well, you're assuming that people understand the difference between those two things. So the classic thing about a frog in a pot, which is another profile of a burnout physician that I deal with, is that they say yes whenever they're asked because it's an honor and because they're a woman and it's expected of them. So it's really important to realize when you're awake and saying yes being based on making a conscious choice, whereas the opposite would be to simply say yes to all inbound requests because you feel guilty saying no. And the doctor is not going to realize the difference between the two until at that point where they are a frog boiling in a pot and they can't take it any longer, they reach up and question how they got here in the first place. And yes, here's what I find. A lot of doctors say loss of autonomy, right, is a cause of burnout. Well, loss of autonomy is when you're satisfied with the way we do things around here, even though it's uncomfortable. When you understand what your ideal job description, even in a nebulous fashion, because an ideal job description ultimately is just a set of feelings. So when people say to me, Dyke, I just want to be able to breathe at work. Well, what would you be doing at work what could we change that would give you the sense of being able to breathe? And then they'll roll out an ideal job description for me. But when you know where you're headed and you've got that target, your ideal job description, realize nobody gets 100%. However, switching from being blown by the winds of change and somebody else has got your puppet strings and it's the way we do things around here to this is my ideal job description, these are the things that I want to change and I'm working on one of them, that change from an external locus of control to being in charge and being on a path, burnout goes away when you're able to assume that new stance with regards to your career. It vanishes like the mist on a field in the morning when the sun comes up.
So we have a couple of questions about resources. One person, well, you got one nice compliment here that was fantastic, thanking you. Does an organizational structure influence burnout? And this person's asking about references, and somebody else asked about getting the slides and whether your book is available in audio format. I believe that this presentation is going to be archived on the AAMC website. I'm pretty sure of that. So at some point, if that's true, then at some point that will be sent out to, obviously, to all the participants. But can you talk a little bit about this issue about organizational structure influencing burnout and the resources available? Are there slides, the books? What's their availability to you?
Well, organizational structure and organizational culture are the two strongest influences of burnout at the organizational level. As a person, as a canary, it's going to be your programming, okay, whether or not you understand an ideal job description. Whether you've woken up to the fact that you actually do have some power in the system. Let me just explain one little piece that will show you a structural influence on burnout. So ultimately, when I'm working with a burned out doctor, they've hired me as their coach. We've worked on getting clear on an ideal job description, and they're working their master plan of the things that they would want to change. At some point in time, they're going to come up against the master plan item that requires somebody up the chain of command to give them permission or resources. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what they need at that point is a leader who they can speak to, negotiate with, and who can have their back and say yes to what they want. Now, the challenge is most organizations that I work with, and this is just a, let's just say that this is a placeholder for a typical organization, a 3-hospital system that has 400 employed doctors. But if you look back at that hospital system 5 years ago, they didn't employ anybody. All of this employing doctors has happened really quickly, and each of those doctors worked in independent clinics prior to being absorbed by the mothership. Are you with me?
Yeah.
So one of these clinics might be a 12-doctor family practice that's 10 miles away from the hospital. It used to be an independent group. Now it's a bunch of physician employees. But what happens when a group joins the mothership is they relax their leadership structure and count on the mothership leading them. They also relax their social structure. So they don't get together anymore as a small group. And what ends up happening is sometimes you can have 400 doctors and their boss is a CMO. There's nobody between them and the CMO. And if the CMO is managing 400 doctors, what chance have you got to influence that person? So the absence of adequate levels of physician leadership in a large multi-site organization is a major challenge to you getting your ideal job description, because there's nobody who can say yes to your request. Another thing that happens when the social structure collapses is these 400 doctors only are invited to a social event once a year, their annual employee physician meeting, right? They used to get together quarterly or monthly when they were a group of 12 in their building, but now that social structure has collapsed. So everybody starts to feel like gerbils on a wheel where the control exists someplace else. And you know why they feel that way? Because it's true. As an organization, structurally, you have to, one, make sure there's adequate levels of physician leadership between the front line and the C-suite, and two, make sure that you maintain the social and cultural engagements that are the glue that stick us together outside of work. If you don't do those things, especially if you don't do those things because they cost money, you're creating a worse coal mine for everybody else who joins after the folks that are there right now.
Craig, do you have some thoughts about this in terms of the organizational structure? Because it sounds like in the beginning when you were introducing yourself that these are some issues that you've been addressing in your institution.
Well, I think the biggest point that I would make, Paula, is this idea that is being, sort of, that is bubbling up, really within Children's Hospital about building wellness, physician wellness specifically into the quality measures. And, as you sort of think that through, it's really not an effort that can't involve corporate change. It has to. So I think having open ears and having a working relationship with the C-suite, as Dyke refers to it, really does, in our organization, have the capacity to be a game changer. I don't know, stay tuned. We'll talk 2 years from now, but I think that's an important piece that's going on.
Well, and I'm hoping that everybody on the line knows what the quadruple aim is, because certainly organizations around the country don't. You want me to explain that, or does everybody know it?
No, please explain it.
So the old triple aim, promulgated by the Institute for Healthcare Improvement in the 1990s, and Don Berwick, they said that the American healthcare system needs to be reformed along 3 tracks. 1, a better patient experience. 2, better quality care. And 3, lower cost. Patient experience, quality, lower cost. And they pushed and pushed and pushed that at the governmental level, and most organizations, if you look at the mission statement for your organization, it's a triple aim mission statement. The challenge is the IHI now and Don Berwick now apologize for the triple aim when they're on their road shows and their trainings, because they say the triple aim, sorry about that, hey, well intentioned, but it burned out the people who are providing care. Why? Because the people were never one of the priorities. If your organization believes in the triple aim, patient experience, quality, and cost, they have nothing in the way of them running roughshod over your life and your well-being in pursuit of those 3 aims, which is why recently, last year in Annals of Family Practice, there is being promulgated, and even the IHI is doing this, the quadruple aim, which is the old triple aim, quality, patient experience, and cost, with a 4th one added, which is the health and well-being of the people who are providing care, doctors and staff. So most organizations have yet to update their mission statements, and most organizations, in my experience, 90% of the healthcare employers in the country do not care about the health and well-being of the people in the system. Now, they care about some things, it's just not the people's health and well-being. So it's interesting to watch the people who come to my website and hire me to do speaking engagements and other things do care, but in many places they don't.
Yeah, I would say that in many, and I haven't talked to all the different institutions, but I think when I talk to leadership, I get the sense that many people do care. But again, as I was saying right at the beginning, they place the focus on the problem on the individual. And sometimes, even when they recognize the problems in the system, they have the same sense of hopelessness or learned helplessness that the physicians do.
Well, let's be really clear, if I can just jump in here. That's called blaming the victim. And let's not pathologize burnout. It's a normal reaction to being shoved down that mine. And lastly, part of their frustration is they're mistaking burnout for a problem and continuing to search for this magic bullet. What's the one thing we can do one time that'll make it all go away? And all I have to do, and I'm sitting in front of a board of directors, I say, first of all, stop the magical thinking, and I teach them the difference between a problem and a dilemma.
So I would leap in here and suggest, I know there's a couple of more questions, but I would leap in here and suggest that just following the quadruple aim doesn't necessarily address physician or provider burnout, because the organization may not employ physicians or providers, and so their people wind up being a set that excludes some of the providers in many cases. So caring for your people doesn't necessarily become an inclusive process.
Well, I would hope that if we've got an organization, let's say a hospital, and I don't know what you're talking about, but let's say a hospital where they have their own staff, but the physicians are not employed by the organization, they're on staff and have privileges in the hospital. I would hope that if that organization understands the quadruple aim enough to take care of their employees, that they can see how it's shooting themselves in the foot with a shotgun to prejudice their caring against the physicians who are not employees that work in the same organization. So caring has to be holistic. You work inside the walls of our organization as a provider, we care about you just as much as we do with the patients. At least those are the people that I work with. If they're drawing lines year in, year out, that kind of stuff, I don't work with them. They're not awake enough.
So there is a question, another question about time management, that you suggested time management as a tool to prevent or address occupational burnout, and among the large number, are there some that are better than others based on the literature?
You can't manage time. There's only so much. What you do is you manage your priorities. So if you do the important stuff and let go of the stuff that's not important, you'll put your time to its highest and best use. but most of the time when I see a time management system, it's about getting more things done without adequate prioritization. Because most of what we're doing or feel are on our lists of things to do in a day. And if we're talking about in a practice situation, many of them you shouldn't even be doing as the physician. You're overqualified and you're not delegating adequately. But again, remember, another piece of this programming for a physician is Lone Ranger superhero. Faced with a bunch of stuff that needs to get done, we tend to throw it all on our back and try to drag it across the finish line. We're not trained to work with teams. We're not trained to cooperate and collaborate. Collaboration in residency is called cheating. So time management so you can get more stuff done that you shouldn't be doing in the first place is crazy. So I would encourage people to look at the tasks for the team on that particular day are delegated to the most appropriate person on the team to do the task, and that when you're looking at your own personal task list that you're prioritizing ruthlessly first, so you're only focused on those things that are most important. And most of the time what I see is physicians, especially with regards to EMR, are in a situation where they may or may not have been asked to do this, but they're basically trying to be basic frontline data entry clerks. At the same time, they're supposed to be the top level care provider. So splitting those things out and apportioning them appropriately is an important task in any workplace. And any administration that says you should be able to do all of your EMR, and by the way, what's wrong with you that you can't and doesn't help you develop the skills or the teamwork to be able to do the documentation task, they basically don't have your best interests at heart. You got to be careful of the attitude that your workplace takes when you have challenges and you're asking for help and they actually point the finger and blame you, like blaming the victim, right, Paula? It happens so often.
It does happen. It happens very often. So we just have a couple of minutes left, and just real quick, is there a way to get the slides? I don't know the answer to that, whether you've worked that out with the AAMC.
Yeah, the slides, this is being recorded, so I'm assuming it's going to be on the AAMC, and I believe the previous webinars were on there too. And somebody said, where do you find the quadruple aim? If you just punch into Google, Annals of Family Medicine, quadruple aim, it will pop right up as the first reference on the page.
And also, is your book available in audiobook format?
It is not. We're on Amazon and my website. I'm going to be updating the book with the last year's worth of experience. Later this year, it will be available Kindle, but it's not available on audiobook.
Okay. So we have 2 minutes. Craig, do you have any last thoughts you'd like to add? And then Dyke, last thoughts?
Well, perhaps on a positive note, you know, there are substantial changes in the way that residency programs are training physicians now. We all have personal opinions about the impact that it's having, but as I listen to some of the conversation, the idea of collaborating, I think, is probably being built in the new generation of trainees, frankly, because of duty hour restrictions. And when you think about the core competencies that the residents are looking at and their programs are looking at, I think that there are some changes that may be very positive that will set people on a pathway perhaps to be more resilient in terms of burnout. Not eliminate it, but probably be resilient.
Thank you. And Dyke, last word?
Well, and I have hopes for the upcoming generations of residents because they are culturally different than we are. They're not driven like us baby boomers. But one of the challenges I see is that work hour restrictions at the level of residency set doctors up for early, like in the first year of their practice, burnout, when they enter the real world. And I actually don't see this as being something that we need to put a positive spin on. I think that everything I've taught today is actually as positive as it can possibly be. You have the power to create life balance. You have the power and the awareness and all the skills that you need to be continuously working on building a more ideal practice. You're smart, you're hardworking. You can recognize Einstein's insanity definition. You can recognize your programming and step out of it. You are capable of all these things. And the more faculty members we can get to model this way of living and the more residents we can teach it early on is the way we change the culture of healthcare going forward. And I am very optimistic that we can do that.
That's terrific. Well, on that optimistic note, I would really like to thank both of our other presenters, Craig Porter and Dyke Drummond. It's a very, very interesting webinar, interesting for me as well. And thank you all for your attention and for listening, and have a good day. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.